The night was still and cold, a biting November wind sweeping through the quiet streets of Ashford, Illinois. Detective Laura Mitchell sat in her car, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup as she studied the abandoned building ahead. It loomed like a shadow, its windows boarded up and its exterior covered in graffiti. Her informant had assured her the suspect was inside, but as the minutes dragged on, her doubts grew. Ashford had always been a sleepy town, nestled far enough from Chicago to avoid its chaos. But over the past few months, the peace had shattered. For murders, each more gruesome than the last, had shaken the community. The media dubbed the killer the caretaker because of the eerie messages left at each scene. "I'm just cleaning up the mess." The killings weren't random, they followed a pattern. All the victims were local figures known for their secrets, corruption, infidelity, abuse. But the latest victim, a high school teacher named Samuel Blakely, didn't seem to fit the profile. No one could figure out why the caretaker targeted him, which made Laura question everything she thought she knew about the case. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped out of the car. Her breath fogged in the frigid air as she approached the building. It was one of Ashford's many relics from an era long gone, once a factory, now a crumbling shell. The informant's tip had been cryptic, but Laura had learned to trust her instincts, and something about this place screamed danger. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a vast, empty space littered with debris. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of mildew lingered. Her footsteps echoed as she moved cautiously, sweeping her flashlight over the room. It felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Then she saw it, a faint trail of red smears leading across the floor. Her pulse quickened as she followed the trail, her hand instinctively resting on the grip of her gun. The smears led to a door at the back of the factory. She hesitated, every fiber of her being screaming for her to turn back, but she couldn't. Not now. The door opened with a groan, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Her flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, but she could make out the outline of something at the bottom. Slowly, she descended, her boots clinking against the metal steps. As she reached the final step, the beam of her flashlight landed on a table in the center of the room. On the table was a Polaroid photograph. Laura picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a picture of her house. Her heart stopped as she realized the photo had been taken from inside, the angle showing her living room window. Behind her, a faint noise broke the silence. She spun around, gun drawn, but the room was empty. The shadows seemed to shift, playing tricks on her eyes. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. The only response was a soft, deliberate whisper from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here, detective." A shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She turned, firing a shot, but it ricocheted off the concrete wall. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You're part of the mess, Laura." Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered to life, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. In the far corner stood a figure, their face obscured by a featureless white mask. They held something in their hand, a knife, glinting in the harsh light. "Why don't you just leave the cleaning to me?" the figure said, their voice distorted. Laura's grip tightened on her gun. "Put the weapon down," she barked, taking aim. The figure tilted their head as if considering her demand, then lunged forward with shocking speed. Laura fired, but the figure dodged, the bullet sparking against the wall. She ducked as the knife slashed through the air inches from her face. The fight was a blur of motion. Laura kicked over the table, using it as a barrier, but the figure vaulted over it effortlessly. She fired again, grazing their shoulder, and they let out a guttural growl before retreating into the shadows. Silence fell once more, broken only by Laura's ragged breathing. She swept the room with her flashlight, but the figure was gone. The only evidence of their presence was the overturned table and the photograph still clutched in her hand. Her radio crackled to life. "Mitchell, do you copy?" It was her partner, Detective Harris. She raised the radio to her lips, her voice shaky. "I'm here. The caretaker was here. They got away." "Where are you?" Harris asked. Laura hesitated, her eyes scanning the room. "I'll send you the address. Bring backup." As she climbed the stairs back to the main floor, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. When she reached her car, she found another Polaroid tucked under the windshield wiper. This one was of her and Harris at the precinct, taken from outside the window. Laura sat in her car, her mind racing. The caretaker wasn't just targeting victims, they were targeting her. Laura couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The Polaroid photo of her and Harris weighed heavily on her lap as she sat in her car, the night swallowing the quiet streets of Ashford. The photo was a warning, a message that the caretaker wasn't done. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Harris's number, the ringing in her ear amplifying the silence around her. Harris, his voice came through, calm but alert. "We've got a serious problem," Laura said, glancing around the street. "The caretaker knows where we are. They've been watching us." "What do you mean?" "Watching us how?" "They left a photo. It's of us, at the precinct." A pause. "Stay where you are. I'll come to you." "No," Laura interrupted. "Meet me at the station. I want this evidence logged immediately. If we're going to find them, we need to do it fast." "Got it." "Be careful," Harris said, and the call ended. Laura slipped the photo into an evidence bag and shoved it into her pocket. She started the car, the engine's low growl cutting through the still night. Her eyes darted between the road and her rearview mirror, the paranoia creeping in like a shadow. Every parked car, every flickering streetlight felt like a potential threat. When she pulled into the precinct lot, she spotted Harris leaning against his car, his expression tense. Laura parked and quickly joined him, handing over the evidence bag. "This is the second message they've left tonight," she said. "First, a photo of my house, now this." Harris examined the Polaroid, his jaw tightening. "They're escalating. They want you to feel cornered." "Well, it's working," Laura muttered. She glanced at the building, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow. "Let's take this inside." The station was quiet, the night shift officers working quietly at their desks. Laura and Harris headed to the evidence room, but as they entered, something caught Laura's attention. A faint smell of bleach lingered in the air, sharp and invasive. "Do you smell that?" she asked, looking around. Harris sniffed the air. "Bleach. That's odd." Laura's eyes scanned the room, landing on a cabinet at the far end. The door was slightly ajar. She approached cautiously, her hand instinctively resting on her holstered gun. She pulled the door open to find another Polaroid sitting on a stack of files. It was a picture of the precinct's break room, taken from inside. "They've been here," Laura whispered, her voice tight with dread. Harris cursed under his breath. How the hell did they get in? Laura's mind raced. The caretaker was always 2 steps ahead. They weren't just targeting victims, they were dismantling the investigation from the inside. "We need to sweep the building," Harris said. "If they're still here." "Wait," Laura interrupted. She pointed to the photo. In the background, just barely visible, was the reflection of a figure in the break room's microwave door. A mask, white and featureless, stared back at them. "That's them," Laura said, her pulse quickening. "They're watching us." Before Harris could respond, the station's lights flickered and went out, plunging the building into darkness. "Shit!" Harris cursed. The emergency lights buzzed to life, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Laura drew her gun, her senses heightened. "They're here. Everyone, stay alert," she shouted, her voice echoing through the station. She and Harris moved cautiously through the hallways, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. The smell of bleach grew stronger, almost suffocating. As they approached the break room, a sound stopped them cold, a faint scraping, like metal dragging against the floor. Laura motioned for Harris to stay behind her as she pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the scene was chilling. A single chair sat in the center, and on it was another Polaroid. Laura picked it up, her breath catching in her throat. It was a picture of Harris's car, taken from the driver's side window. "Harris," Laura said, turning to him, "they've been in your car." Harris's face went pale. What are they playing at?" A noise from the main hallway drew their attention. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. "They're taunting us," Laura whispered, her grip tightening on her gun. They moved toward the sound, their footsteps silent on the tile floor. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, the emergency lights flickering ominously. Then, at the far end, they saw it. The figure in the white mask, standing perfectly still. "Freeze!" Laura shouted, raising her weapon. The figure didn't move. "I said freeze," she repeated, taking a step forward. And then, without warning, the figure turned and bolted, disappearing around the corner. "Go!" Laura yelled, and they sprinted after it. The chase led them through the station's maze-like corridors, the figure always just out of reach. It darted into the stairwell, and Laura and Harris followed, their hearts pounding. When they reached the basement, the door slammed shut behind them, the echo reverberating through the dark space. Harris pushed the door open, and they stepped into the basement's cold, damp air. The faint glow of their flashlights revealed rows of filing cabinets and storage boxes. And then they saw it, a message scrawled on the concrete wall in what looked like blood. "Cleanliness is next to godliness." The words sent a chill down Laura's spine. The caretaker was here. And they weren't leaving without making their presence known. The air in the basement was heavy, damp, and reeked of decay. Laura's flashlight wavered as she scanned the walls, her breath shallow. The message in blood-red letters loomed, a grotesque proclamation of the caretaker's twisted philosophy. Harris stood beside her, gripping his gun tightly, his jaw clenched in controlled fear. "They're playing with us," Laura muttered, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Harris moved closer to the wall, examining the smeared letters. "It's fresh. They were here recently." "Stay sharp," Laura said. "We're not leaving until we find something, anything, to give us an edge." Their footsteps echoed in the vast space as they navigated the labyrinth of filing cabinets and storage boxes. The dim light cast elongated shadows, twisting ordinary objects into sinister shapes. Then came the sound, soft, almost imperceptible. A faint humming, like someone singing a lullaby. Laura froze, motioning for Harris to stop. They stood in silence, straining to locate the source of the eerie melody. "It's coming from that direction," Harris whispered, nodding toward a narrow passageway lined with old filing shelves. Laura took the lead, her flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. The humming grew louder, distorted, as though coming from an old, warped record. As they rounded the corner, the beam of her flashlight landed on a figure at the far end of the passage. It was crouched low, rocking back and forth, its white mask glowing faintly in the dim light. "Hands where I can see them," Laura commanded, her voice firm. The figure stopped moving. Slowly, it tilted its head to one side, the mask reflecting the light like a predatory animal's eyes. "I said hands up." The figure didn't comply. Instead, it raised one hand, clutching a Polaroid camera. With a sharp click, the camera's flash lit up the passage, momentarily blinding Laura and Harris. When their vision cleared, the figure was gone. "Damn it!" Laura hissed. Harris rushed forward to where the figure had been. On the ground lay a freshly developed Polaroid. He picked it up, his hands trembling. The photo was of them, Laura and Harris, standing in that exact passageway, guns drawn. "They're watching us right now," Harris said, his voice low. Laura's skin crawled. "They're toying with us, leading us deeper." "But why? What's their endgame?" Before Harris could respond, a loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the basement. The sound reverberated like a warning bell. "Let's move," Laura said, leading the way toward the noise. The hallway opened into a larger room filled with old lockers and industrial equipment covered in dust and grime. In the center of the room stood a single chair, a body slumped over in it. Laura and Harris approached cautiously, their guns trained on the figure. As they got closer, they realized it wasn't a person but a mannequin dressed in an old police uniform. Pinned to its chest was another Polaroid, held in place by a knife. Laura pulled it free, examining the photo. It was a close-up of the mannequin's blank face, but behind it, faintly visible, was the outline of another figure, someone standing in the shadows, holding a large blade. "Someone else is down here," Harris said, his voice tight. Laura scanned the room, her flashlight sweeping over every shadowed corner. "They're setting us up for something. We can't." A sudden crash interrupted her, the sound of metal falling to the ground. It came from the lockers. Laura gestured for Harris to cover her as she moved toward the noise. She yanked open one of the lockers, revealing nothing but old, rusted tools. Another bang echoed, this time from across the room. "They're moving," Harris said, his grip tightening on his gun. Laura's heart pounded as she tried to anticipate the caretaker's next move. The lights above flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness. When the lights returned, a figure stood on the other side of the room. It was the caretaker, holding a long, bloodied blade. Their white mask tilted ever so slightly as they regarded Laura and Harris like prey. "Drop the weapon," Laura shouted, her voice unwavering. The caretaker didn't respond. Instead, they slowly raised the blade, pointing it toward the mannequin in the chair. "What the hell are you doing?" Harris demanded. The caretaker's head snapped toward them, and in an instant, they lunged. Laura fired, the deafening crack of her gunshot echoing in the confined space. But the caretaker was fast, ducking and weaving between the equipment. Harris fired next, the bullet ricocheting off metal. "They're too quick." The caretaker disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the faint sound of their blades scraping against the concrete floor. "Damn it!" Laura cursed, scanning the room. A soft clicking noise drew her attention. It was the Polaroid camera. She turned just in time to see a flash, and the caretaker emerged from the darkness, charging straight for her. Harris tackled them mid-stride, the two of them crashing to the ground in a chaotic struggle. The caretaker swung their blade wildly, narrowly missing Harris's throat. Laura aimed her gun, but the fight was too close. One wrong shot could hit Harris. "Hold them down," she shouted, rushing forward. Harris grunted as he tried to wrestle the blade away. "They're stronger than they look." Laura grabbed the mannequin's chair and swung it with all her strength, hitting the caretaker square in the head. The impact sent them sprawling, the mask cracking slightly but not breaking. The caretaker scrambled to their feet, retreating into the shadows once more. "We have to end this," Harris panted, blood dripping from a shallow cut on his arm. Laura nodded, her determination hardening. "We're not leaving this basement until we catch them." The lights flickered again, and the room fell silent. Somewhere in the darkness, the caretaker waited, planning their next move. The basement felt like it was closing in on them. Every creak, every faint sound seemed amplified, each one setting their nerves further on edge. Laura adjusted her grip on the flashlight, its beam trembling as she moved. Harris, nursing the cut on his arm, kept his gun raised, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "We need to split up," Laura whispered. "Are you insane?" Harris hissed back. "That's exactly what they want. They're too fast." "Together, we're an easy target," Laura argued. "You go left, I'll take the right. We'll corner them." Harris hesitated, but he knew she was right. With a reluctant nod, he veered off toward a row of old filing cabinets while Laura headed toward the far wall, her footsteps careful, deliberate. The air was thick with tension, the silence punctuated only by their muffled breaths and the occasional distant clang of metal. Laura's mind raced as she tried to predict the caretaker's next move. They were smart, calculating. Every step felt like it could lead straight into another trap. As she edged closer to the wall, her flashlight caught a faint glimmer. She moved the beam, revealing a series of jagged scratches etched into the concrete. Words. "The final act begins." Her stomach dropped. She had no time to decipher its meaning before a faint click behind her made her spin around. Nothing. She swallowed hard, her finger tightening on the trigger of her gun. Meanwhile, Harris moved methodically through the maze of cabinets, each one a potential hiding place for their masked assailant. He paused, listening, and thought he heard a faint shuffle nearby. "Laura," he called out softly, his voice barely audible. No response. His pulse quickened. In the next instant, a shadow darted past him. He spun around, gun raised, but it was gone. He cursed under his breath, feeling the growing dread that they were being toyed with. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from Laura's direction. "Laura." He bolted toward the sound, weaving through the cluttered basement. His heart pounded as he imagined the worst. When he reached her, she was crouched on the ground, her gun aimed at a toppled shelf. Broken glass and scattered tools lay everywhere, but there was no sign of the caretaker. "They're hurting us," she said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "They're not just attacking, they're leading us somewhere." Harris glanced around, his jaw tightening. "Then let's turn the tables." Laura nodded. "We take the offensive." No more waiting for them to make the first move. She gestured toward the back of the basement, where a heavy metal door stood slightly ajar. The dim light spilling through the crack suggested another room. Through there, she said. Could be a trap, Harris warned. Definitely is, Laura replied. But it's our best shot. They approached the door cautiously, guns at the ready. Laura pushed it open with the barrel of her weapon, revealing a small, starkly lit room. In the center was a table. On it lay a row of Polaroid photographs. They moved closer, their apprehension growing. The photos were of them, Laura and Harris, captured at various moments during their time in the basement. The most recent one showed Laura standing by the scratched wall, her flashlight illuminating the ominous words. How? Harris started, but his voice trailed off. Before they could process it, the door behind them slammed shut. The room plunged into darkness. Stay close, Laura said, her voice firm despite the panic bubbling beneath the surface. From the shadows came the familiar clicking sound of the Polaroid camera. Flash. The brief burst of light revealed the caretaker, standing mere feet away. Flash. They were closer now, their white mask cracked from the earlier blow, revealing part of a scarred face beneath. Laura raised her gun, firing in the direction of the last flash. The gunshot echoed deafeningly, but when the light returned, the caretaker was gone. We're sitting ducks in here, Harris said, his voice tight with urgency. Laura scanned the room, her eyes landing on a vent near the floor. It was small but big enough for them to crawl through. There, she said, pointing. Harris didn't hesitate. He pried the vent cover off with his knife and motioned for Laura to go first. As she climbed in, the space was suffocatingly tight, the metal walls pressing against her shoulders. Harris followed, pulling the vent cover back into place behind him. The sound of their breathing echoed in the confined space as they crawled forward, the faint light from Laura's flashlight guiding the way. Behind them came a sound that froze them both. Clang. The sound of someone entering the vent. Keep moving, Laura whispered urgently. They picked up the pace, the narrow space making every movement a struggle. The sound of pursuit grew louder, the caretaker's blade scraping against the metal walls. Laura reached the end of the vent, where another grate led into a different part of the basement. She kicked it open, tumbling out onto the floor. Harris followed, slamming the grate shut and jamming it with a nearby crowbar. For now, they were safe. But the game was far from over. Laura and Harris found themselves in a cavernous chamber beneath the basement, a room they hadn't seen on the building's blueprints. The air was thick with decay, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead did little to dispel the oppressive darkness. At the center of the room was a grotesque altar fashioned from broken furniture, old tools, and jagged pieces of glass. Atop it sat a mask, identical to the caretaker's, perched as if it were watching them. Is this where it all started? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Looks like it, Harris said grimly, his eyes scanning for movement. A noise behind them, a faint scuffle, made them spin around, guns raised. But there was nothing there. The altar suddenly lit up, a series of ancient runes etched into its surface glowing with an unnatural light. Laura instinctively took a step back, her breathing quickening. This is wrong, she muttered. This isn't just a game to them. It's a ritual. Before Harris could respond, the heavy metal door behind them slammed shut. The sound reverberated through the room like a gunshot, and the dim lights flickered ominously. And then, from the shadows, the caretaker emerged. Their mask was shattered, revealing a gnarled visage beneath, burned, scarred, and distorted beyond recognition. But what struck Laura most was the look in their eyes. It wasn't madness. It was purpose. You've come far, the caretaker said, their voice low and rasping. It was the first time they had spoken. But you've already lost. Harris didn't wait. He fired 2 shots, both hitting the caretaker squarely in the chest. They stumbled but didn't fall. It's not that simple, the caretaker growled, stepping forward. Harris raised his gun again, but the caretaker was faster. They hurled a jagged shard of glass, slicing across his forearm. Harris cried out, dropping his weapon. Laura fired, aiming for their exposed face. The shot grazed them, but they lunged at her with inhuman speed, slamming her into the altar. You don't understand what you've stepped into, the caretaker hissed, pinning her down. Laura struggled, her hand fumbling for her fallen flashlight. She grabbed it and swung it with all her might, shattering the rest of their mask. The caretaker recoiled, clutching their face. "You don't get to win," they roared, their voice echoing like thunder. Seizing the moment, Harris tackled them, sending both of them crashing to the floor. The impact sent the caretaker's knife skittering across the room. "Finish this," Harris yelled, holding the caretaker down. Laura's eyes darted to the glowing altar. The runes pulsed faster, as if feeding off the chaos in the room. She grabbed the knife and, with no hesitation, drove it into the heart of the altar. A deafening sound tore through the chamber, and the light from the runes exploded outward, blinding them. The caretaker let out an unearthly scream as their body convulsed, their figure dissolving into a shadowy mist. The force of the blast knocked Laura and Harris to the ground. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The altar was gone. The caretaker was gone. Laura and Harris slowly got to their feet, their bodies aching and their minds reeling. "It's over," Harris said, though he didn't sound convinced. Laura looked around the now empty chamber, her gaze lingering on the spot where the caretaker had vanished. "Is it?" she whispered. They stumbled back to the surface, their steps heavy with exhaustion. The night was eerily quiet, and for the first time, the air felt breathable. When they reached their car, Harris turned to Laura. "What do we tell people?" Laura hesitated, the weight of everything they'd endured pressing down on her. "We tell them the truth," she said finally. "But who's going to believe us?" As they drove away, the motel stood silently behind them, its dark windows like unblinking eyes. But deep beneath its foundations, the faint glow of the runes flickered back to life.